Hi everyone, and welcome to the sew along video for the Diamond Drape Dress 1806 version 2. So this is a very quick and easy sew, and hopefully you'll be able to follow this video. The first thing we need to do is thread up our overlocker with 4 threads of colour that match our fabric, and our overlocker is set to 6mm width. In addition to this, we're going to be needing a plain sewer to sew the hem. So if you have a cover stitch machine, you could just go ahead and do that, or else you'll need to thread up your sewing machine with a ball needle and make sure you lengthen the stitch length slightly from normal. So when you're ready, we're going to get started on the back piece. Now the back piece can either be cut as one pair, which is a mirror, in which case you need to sew a seam down the middle with your overlocker, or you can cut it on the fold, and that's just entirely dependent on how much fabric you have and the size that you're going to be sewing. So let's get started, and we'll take our back piece, or back pieces if you have them. And the first thing I'd like you to do, if you have a pair, so a mirror piece of backs, go ahead and match the centre back seam and overlock that from the neck to the hemline. The version I'm sewing doesn't. I've cut this piece on the fold, and we're just going to continue with that. So sew your backs together so you have one whole back, and then we'll come back and start sewing the pocket piece. So here is my back piece, and this is right side up, so the neck is up here and the hemline is down here, and this is that pocket area. You can see the notch cut out here. What I'd like you to do is take this area and place it right sides together, matching this area here, and you'll find that there is a notch in the center. So when you match that together, there's a notch here. So I'd like you to overlock that down from those 2 matching edges right through to the notch position. So that's going to create the bottom of our pocket. So once you've done it on this side, do exactly the same on the other side of the back. Find that pocket area, fold it over so that right sides are together, and then we're going to sew just that short distance through to that notch in the center where the fold is. Now place this piece right sides up with the neck at the top, so this is the back neck area like this. Place that up here and the hemline down here. Then go ahead and find your front piece and place it right sides down. So what we're going to do is have right sides together. So to make it easy on myself, the first thing I'm going to do is sew the shoulder edges together. So right sides together, match that shoulder, and overlock the seam in place. And then come directly through to the other side and do the same thing on the other shoulder. Now we're going to sew part of the side seam. So find the underarm point and match that. So here's the shoulder we've just sewn. So we're going to start at the underarm. So just overlock a few stitches in just to hold that in place. And then what you need to do is find those notches down the side seam. Make sure your notches match. And start overlocking down. So here's my first notch. Now the second notch will match to a point that's higher than the overlocking we created earlier. And that's as far as we want to overlock now. We want to overlock to that second notch, so it's going to look a little bit strange. And when you reach there, just overlock off the edge, maybe leave 2 inches. So there's a notch right on the edge there, and then there's a second notch there, and that's where we want to stop our overlocking. Now I need you to repeat that on the other side of the garment. So here's the shoulder and here's our underarm position. Overlock a few stitches to secure, find the first notch and match it, and then overlock up to it. Then keep coming down and you'll find this notch here and match that to the notch on the other side. And then just overlock up to and then off from there. Right, so now we're going to sew the rest of that seam, but we need to sew it from the hemline up. So we need to turn our garment around. Right, so now effectively I've got my garment upside down because I've got the hem at the top. And you can tell it's the hem because there's these small notches in the side seam, and this shows us the hem turn position, which for this garment is 1 inch, but we won't worry about that for now. So matching that side seam, we're going to overlock up. So you'll come up the side seam and you'll see the first set of notches, so make sure that they match. Try not to stretch this out as you go. Oh, and I didn't mention that we're actually sewing on the edge of our raw edge. We're not allowing to cut anything off with the overlocking. The overlocking blade is just going to be really to tidy up the edge of our fabric. So now continue up the side, match the second notch. There you go, I've stopped at the second notch position, and now you'll see our original overlocking coming into place here. What we want to do now is overlock up to the next notch, and you'll see our previous join position here, and all we want to do is try and overlock this as a straight line. So what I mean is, what we need to do is just open up the fabric, and we want to sew straight through to meet up with the edge of the pocket down here. So overlock up. Now this position is where you'll need to cut off the thread underneath and go through the notch here, and it can be a bit forgiving if you need to trim any extra fabric off. And then continue off the side. And repeat that on the other side. So come back to your hemline, and repeat what we did earlier. As you could tell, I was a little bit naughty there. My cutting had gone a little bit haywire, so I just used the overlocking blade to tidy it up. This fabric is very, very light and rolling. So that's what we're going to look at for the hemline, for the side seam line, sorry. So that's our pocket completed and our side seams. If you have a cover seamer, now's a really good time to sew your hem. If you don't, what you can do is overlock the hem, then go to your plain sewer and either run a line or two lines of stitching, or you could use a twin needle on a domestic sewing machine. So let's just run through this one step at a time. What I'm going to do is, making sure our seams are pressed towards the back, I'm going to overlock the raw edge of the hem just to hold those fraying edges in place. Okay, so I'm not going to finish sewing the hem right now, because right now we're going to move on to armbands. And the other reason I'm not going to sew the hem right now is because when I move to my plain sewing machine, not only can I sew in my hem, I can also put my label in at the same time. So let's start working on the neckband. So go ahead and get your neckband piece. So the first thing we want to do is making sure this is right sides together, this short edge here. Now we're going to turn it so that wrong sides are together. So this seam we've just done, we've just overlocked, is our centre back neck. Now I'm going to put a pin here because this fabric is very rolly. It's a toile fabric I had. So here is our garment, and it's still inside out, so right sides are inside, and you will notice we have a notch at the centre back. So that is where this seam needs to go to. So take that piece and place it right sides together, matching that notch to the seam you just created. And I'm going to pin it. Now when I pin, I like to pin within the seam allowance, just in case there's any ladders. Alright, so as we continue around, you'll see a small notch here. So making sure that's still wrong sides together, we want to match that notch to the shoulder seam. And make sure the bulk of that seam is facing towards the back of our garment. And to make it easier on myself, I'm going to pin that into position as well. Now I'm going to come across and do exactly the same thing for the other shoulder. Making sure our band is wrong sides together. So it's got right sides out, and then we place that against the shoulder seam. So what we're going to do is have right sides together of our garment. Then I'm going to pin that in place so that that seam faces towards the back. Right, so now we're going to find the centre front position. And at the lowest point of the centre front, you'll find another notch. And I've cut that a little bit deep, but that's okay. I'm going to make sure my band is still folded and not twist. So there we have wrong sides together, and I'm going to match that to the centre front notch. So just go ahead and check that nothing else in your band is twisted, and we're going to start overlocking. So it's up to you where you'd like to start overlocking from. I tend to start mine from a shoulder, but if you prefer to start it from the centre back, that's fine too. So the neckband is slightly smaller than the area it's going to be sewn into, and that's because we need to stretch it so that the neckband doesn't gape. So what that means is we just need to ease this into position nice and gently as we sew. And we want to make sure that the ease or the stretch is evenly distributed between our notch points. So I'm going to sew it, I'm going to overlock it with my band on top because I feel like I have more control that way. And we have to make sure that all three of our edges are perfectly lined up, our raw edges are perfectly lined up. The other thing about this is we want to make sure we maintain the width of the band the whole way round. So start off by making sure your raw edges are even, and just overlock a few stitches just to hold that in place. Now another thing we need to make sure of is that we don't overlock over any of our pins because they will smash our needles. Right, so when you're ready, we're just going to start overlocking that band into place. So just go ahead and double check that your width is consistent all the way around, and it's a good idea to press this. So you want to press this so the bulk is facing towards the body of the garment, and sometimes it's a nice idea to run just a little edge stitch in from the edge of the seam there. That's another option should you choose. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the armhole area. So we should have a pair of armbands. Here is my pair of armbands, and you will have a notch around about centre, and now it's not center, it's just slightly, 6 mils, 1/4 of an inch closer towards the front armhole. So what we need to do is take one of these, place it right sides together and overlock that short seam. And do the same thing with the other piece. So what you will see when you fold it at the folded edge is that the notch will be closer on one side, and the side that it's closer to is the front. So take that armband and fold it so that wrong sides are together. And this seam line here is the underarm, and that notch is the shoulder point. So just like we did for the neck area, take that band and make sure it is wrong sides together, so right sides out. Now if you find it rolling quite a bit like mine is here, I'm just going to go to my plain sewer and run a small line of tacking stitches just to hold those raw edges together. So now it's time to put our armband into our armhole, and what we're going to do is place that seam to the underarm. And make sure that notch matches to the shoulder area, and we're making sure that that seam faces towards the back. So as you can tell here, this will need to be stretched to make sure it fits in the correct way. So when you're ready, come to your overlocker, and I like to start overlocking from the back side of the underarm seam, but it's entirely up to you. I always sew a couple of stitches just to secure it into place, and making sure right sides are together. We're going to stretch this to fit that armhole area. Okay, so now you just need to repeat that for the other armhole. And just go ahead and check that that seam is nice and consistent the whole way around. And if you edge stitch the armhole, the neckband, now it's a good idea to edge stitch the armhole as well. So the last step in our process is to sew our hem. If you have a twin needle, you can use that. The hem allowance is 1 inch, which is 2.5 centimeters, and there will be a notch in the pattern to show you the turn point. So you might find it easier to go to your iron and press this in place before you sew. Right, so start at a side seam and turn your fabric at that notch position, which will give you that 1 inch hemline. Making sure those seams are sitting directly on top of each other and that they're facing towards the back. We're going to start by sewing a small back tack just to secure our seam. And then I'm going to sew this line of hemming stitches right on top of that overlocking so we don't see it. And as you can tell, I'm sewing this from the wrong side, but if you prefer, you can sew it from the right side. The other thing I would like to say is that I've lengthened my stitch length and I have a ball needle in here to stop my fabric from running. So because I want to mimic the look of a cover stitcher, what I'm going to do now is run a second row of top stitching just in from the first line of top stitching. So that's the effect you'll get with a twin needle on a domestic sewing machine. So to do this just on a plain sewer, I'm just going to use the edge of my foot as a guide and sew a second line of stitches parallel to the first. And as you can tell, I've turned my fabric over and I'm on the right side. So go ahead and do some quality control work, trim any excess threads off, and if you have a label, now's the time to sew that into your back neck area. So thanks for joining me for this sew along video. You've completed your garment, and I look forward to you joining me for my next sew along video soon.